The narrative around Seiko in 2023 is that the QC is getting worse, especially than what it was 5 years ago. There's not a lot of value over $1,000, and in general, they're starting to become overpriced. So the question is, does the Seiko Prospex GMT provide more ammunition to this narrative, or does it smash it to pieces and give us a good old slice of Seiko at their very best? I'm going to break this review down into two parts. Obviously we'll do the specs as usual, but then we'll look at what within this watch makes us think same old Seiko and what supports a new, more promising Seiko. So here we go, let's get straight into it. We'll get straight into the specs then with this one. Just a quick one to say thank you for everybody who commented on the unboxing video. Some of the comments and questions there have helped to shape the review, so really appreciate that. What we've got here then is a 42mm case with a thickness of 12.9mm, which is better than I expected. Lug to lug is 48.6mm. Sapphire crystal with AR on the inside, Lumibright on the hands, indexes, and a drop at the 12 o'clock on the bezel. Movement is the 6R54, so they offer plus 25 to minus 15 seconds per day out the box. We'll see how that looks later on this particular example. I haven't had great luck with 6R movements in the past. I found with previous 6R movements that they seem to go out of regulation very quickly. I'm not sure why, but yeah, I've had a lot of them drop to sort of negative or plus 30 seconds per day without even touching them. So I don't know what the issue is. I've always found the NH movements actually more reliable than 6Rs. So let's see how this one holds up long term. 200 meters water resistant, 4,800 amperes per meter of magnetic resistance, 176 grams of weight without removing any of the links, unidirectional dive bezel here, screw down crown, and of course the big thing with this is you've got a Seiko dive watch, highly finished with a GMT function. Looking at the case finishing on this one, the finishing is absolutely sublime. I mean, it is superb for this price point on the head of the watch. The brushing is really nicely done, the lines are super defined between brushed and polished edges, and the polished chamfers that run right the way around the sides of this case are mirror perfect polishing. They really are something special, and it's hard for me to show on camera just how good the polishing is on the head of this watch. You've got the crown just above the 4 o'clock, unsigned on this one, but easy to grip, nice knurling, and yeah, nicely finished. Looking on the underside of the case, you've got a second set of chamfers leading towards the case back, which are also extremely highly polished, and that leads to the screw down case back, where you'll find the Seiko Great Wave, which you'll be familiar with if you've owned any of the Seiko Prospex divers in any recent times. So let's take a closer look at the dial, and this is where this watch comes alive. Now, I only have the green in my hand, and I haven't had hands-on with the black or with the limited edition, but the green is sunburst, and what makes it so special is the way that it plays with the light. You get a different shade of green in different lights, and it's always interesting to look at. The indices are applied, and again, really finely polished all the way around the indices. The hands on this one, so of course you've got the GMT hand there, very nicely finished in gold. Seconds hand, extremely Seiko. You've got the white and red dots there on the end of it, and yeah, that one's polished, and again, nothing visible with naked eye. It all looks very nice. Date window is between the 4 and the 5. It's a black date wheel with the dark green. It blends in nicely. I don't have any issues, and actually it's not particularly awkward. It's quite stealthy, so although I'm not always a fan of date windows in this area on the dial, in this case it works well. You've got Seiko and the Prospex logo at the top on the dial, automatic, 3 days. I don't know why we needed to have the power reserve printed there. GMT above that, and below it is divers 200 meters. On the Rehort, I've printed the 1 to 24, Actually, it's only the odd numbers that are printed, so you get the 23, and you get triangles in between. Initially, I didn't like the fact that this is only printed halfway up the retort, but when you look square on with the watch, because the crystal has a chamfer, it means that you can read the 24-hour scale without it appearing in the chamfer of the crystal and getting distorted. So actually, I take it back on my initial impressions. That's quite a nice touch. The bezel on this one is a slightly different shade of green. So the dial is more like a sunburst British racing green, I would say. And then the bezel is a little bit more muted in terms of colour. It's more like an olive green. Probably shouldn't work when you think there's two different shades there, but the colours do work together and it works convincingly as a package. But you will get less light play, obviously, from the bezel, but it is ceramic, it's very shiny, and it does add a touch of class, a touch more class to the watch. In terms of operating the bezel, I read some comments previously that people found it was too light and there is less resistance on this than a lot of the other Seiko models, but I think this was smart from Seiko and I think it was intentional. There's not a lot of surface area to grip on the bezel. It's quite slim and slender in terms of profile for this sort of watch. And on my Mido, I have the problem where the bezel is quite stiff and it's difficult to grip, and with clammy hands you just slip all over it and it's difficult to turn. I think with this one, in the same way that Omega does it with the Seamaster, they make a low resistance because they know it's not always that easy to grip, especially on a hot day where it's a slimmer bezel, and they've done that to help you out. In terms of the actual operation, it's the smoothest Seiko bezel I've ever felt. It is like a hot knife through butter. And everything, you'll be pleased to know, is well aligned. What we've got here is a relatively simple brushed 3-link bracelet. The clasp has 4 holes of micro adjust. It's a milled inner, it's a pressed outer, it's got a Seiko branded keeper on it, and it has a dive extension. And before I forget, let's get this on the time grapher. Am I impressed? Not particularly. Am I disappointed? Not really. I think it's about what I would expect. I would like Seiko to do a little bit more and get the rate down a little bit, but amplitude is good. Beat error is really good on this one. So hopefully it will stay this way. The defining factor of this watch is the finishing on the case, the hands, the indices, and the inner polished ring that runs inside of that bezel. It really is the X factor and it is something special, and you need to see it in person. Please trust me on this. The finishing is, I think, perhaps punching above the price point. I believe it's superior to some of the Tag Heuer models that I've handled and some of the Longines models that I've handled at a similar price point. The dial is excellent. I can't speak for the other colorways, but this sunburst effect, it's constantly changing with different lights. It's so dynamic, it's so interesting, and I love it. And what's great about this dial is that it looks green almost all the time. You have to be in very dim light to not pick up the green. I had one of the 1960s Seiko reissues in green. I'll put a picture up here for you. And that was so dark it looked black unless it was in direct sunlight. This watch does not suffer from that problem. It looks green most of the time and it looks very green in sunlight. You'll be relieved to know. This offers the perfect blend of capable dive watch with classic styling, lots of Seiko cues and nods to the past, but also with a useful and well integrated GMT. It's an incredibly dated clasp. It's a really rattly keeper. It doesn't really lock into place and it doesn't inspire confidence. Have a listen to this. There's no micro adjustment. I don't understand why we need a cheap diver's extension. There's going to be so few people buying this deep sea diving, and even if you did want a diver's extension, the cheap pressed metal fold out doesn't inspire any confidence. Also, this diver's extension means the clasp is excessively long, it doesn't need to be so big, and the bracelet integration to the case. Again, this is lazy. That will wear down the case. That's what you see with vintage watches where the bracelets get old and they wear out. They actually damage the case material. I'm disappointed with this bracelet. The lume, I haven't shown you up to this point because I think it's average, and I think for this price point, I expect a little bit more. My Seiko Monster had significantly brighter lume than this one. It's not bad, but thinking of the price, it could still be better. Personally, I don't like the unsigned crown. I know some people don't mind it. For me, it feels like a mail order item from AliExpress. Considering these points, it feels like Seiko spent a lot of money on the head of the watch, and then they got to the bracelet and they realized they'd spent all their budget, and any old thing will do. That's why I think you should really negotiate discount on this if you're going to buy one. Anyway, I've told you why this is the same old Seiko, and I've told you why this is a different Seiko. So let's come to a conclusion and work out exactly what this watch is.
Yes or no, this is your last chance, no beating around the bush.
So where do I stand in conclusion with this watch? Well, let me stress one point from the review. You need to go and see this watch in person to appreciate it. Watching it on video, looking at photos, it doesn't do it justice. The biggest strength is the finishing and how it plays with the light, and how the colour just changes ever so slightly as the light changes, and you get all these different shades of green to enjoy. And the polishing is absolutely superb. I don't know if it's Soratsu in places or not, but it really is a high quality, and it is a standard that I haven't seen at this price point from Seiko. I would say something about it has a little bit more X factor, even than the 62 mass SPB Glacier dial, which I picked up last year. So you really need to go and see it. And when you do, one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to be swept away by everything I've just mentioned about this watch, and you'll fall in love and you'll buy it. Or alternatively, you'll appreciate everything that I've just said, but you won't be able to forgive the tinny clasp, the slightly rattly bracelet, the poor integration between the bracelet and the case, the unsigned crown, and then you'll think of other watches and maybe see some other watches in and around this price point that tick all of the boxes. So it really depends, I think, how much you value finishing and of course the look on this watch. And when I say finishing, I of course mean the head of the watch, not the bracelet. This is genuinely my favourite ever Seiko release. And I'm saying that after 2 weeks, so take that with a pinch of salt. I'm still probably somewhat in the honeymoon phase. I will, however, be replacing the bracelet on this one when I see a release from Uncle Seiko, as I saw one of the comments in the unboxing video also mentioned they would probably wait for an Uncle Seiko bracelet release, as they had the same experience with the 62 mass SPB series bracelet, which is also obviously on this watch as well. If I had to finish the review with one sentence, I would say that the Seiko Prospex GMT is fantastic but flawed. Anyway, I'd love to know your thoughts on this release, on Seiko as a brand, and whether you'll be picking this one up or waiting for something else. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Cheers. If you've enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. As I mentioned, it really does mean a lot. I think you can subscribe by clicking here, or maybe you just want to check out another video. Might I suggest this one right here? Come on, one of these has got to be attractive to you. Maybe subscribe, then click the video. Just a suggestion, hey, no pressure.